Hello there. Welcome to part 2 of the story of Mortilous. Today we're looking at betrayal and murder by those who should have been most trusted and most honoured by the people of Mortilous, and their fall from grace into the embrace of chaos. Our story starts years ago as a young girl out on a hunting trip with her family stirred, as she had often done, into the Great Scar. The Scar is an ancient legion in the planet, created long ago in a forgotten war during the dark ages of technology. It's visible from space as a great scar in the planet, a great wrinkle broken through the surface of the world. Greater than any natural canyon, it traverses over 5,000 kilometers across continents, partially flooded by water and inhabited by dangerous predatory birds. As she stared out into the scar and up at the sky, she wondered what future held for her. What was she going to be? What could she do in a world where such terrors had happened? This little girl's name was Cardamandua, and she would have a great future. Born into a lower noble family, she would grow in fame and beauty and popularity amongst the social elite of Mortilous. She was born into the capital city of Mona, and her father was a great tradesman and lower-level statesman in his later life, introducing Cardamandua to the world of politics quite early on in her youth. Unlike others, being born into the social elite meant that she didn't have to attend combat school at the age of 7, as most other children of Mortilous would have to do, instead living a relatively privileged life, visiting the great gladiatorial arenas, going on hunting excursions but rarely having to do the hunting herself. She lived an easy life, if one can be had on Mortilous. As she grew older, growing up in the halls of power on Mortilous, she would visit the off-world penal colony in orbit. She would visit even the great holy shrines of the Astartes on their temple monastery in orbit. She would get to know the military leaders, the political elite, and navigate the corridors of power with grace and efficiency. When she was a young woman, she would encounter a young, politically powerful man from one of the other noble families by the name of Venetus. Venetus was an intelligent, charismatic, and strong-willed individual who believed in doing the best for his people, and was aware that Mortilous had somewhat become estranged from the Imperium, not having any new orders or commands from the Imperium for untold centuries. However, with such a large local population and so many inherent difficulties of their world and their local region of space, it had never been a high priority. Venetus, however, would champion his campaign to become the new legate of the world in time, based on reforms and advancing the power of Mortilous and projecting itself beyond the confines of its own system in more than just bombing raids of ancient Xenos cities long abandoned on dead worlds. Some, however, felt such notions to be folly, and may attract unwelcome attention from the deep void of space, or worse, from the warp. But many of the population rejoiced in this idea. As he campaigned, his popularity and love by the people grew, eventually resulting in him being pronounced legate, the effectively local planetary governor. The head of the Senate and the Triumvirate he became the most powerful man on Mortilous, with overall authority over the local planetary defense force, which numbered in them countless hundreds of millions of soldiers and many warships. His wife, Cartamandua, revelled in her new-found position as effectively the political princess of Mortilous. Men and women of the noble houses and of the general population would bow to her. Stories and songs and poems were wrote of her beauty and her charisma and charm, and how beautiful her smile and her very presence could elevate a room. Unbeknownst to all these people, including Cartamandua herself, events were unfolding on the penal moon, or at least that's how history would record it. Much of these records have unfortunately been lost to Imperial scholars. It is believed that on the Imperial moon, a place where many political and military exiles were often sent, many people were even born there, with parents who were sentenced to crimes years earlier, long forgotten. Generations of children were born onto this hard labour penal colony moon around Mortilous. From there, a man would rise, a priest, it is said, named Volocatus. Some would later believe that Volocatus came from outside, beyond the rim of the solar system, attracted by the ideological dreams of the new legate. With him, he secretly brought a new religion, the worship of chaos. Initially starting a small cult on the moon, he eventually, through some unknown means, possibly through followers within the planetary defense force, was able to escape the moon and make his way to Mortilous. There, posing as a priest of the cult of the Emperor of Mankind, he would, through great oratory and great charisma, eventually find an audience, and a receptive audience, amongst the noble elite, eventually meeting Cartamandua herself. Instantly smitten with this charming, handsome, tall figure, she would quickly begin hosting private sessions with him and her close circle of friends while he preached to them about the Emperor of Man. But slowly, through the course of his teachings, he would begin to influence their thinking that perhaps the Emperor was wrong. The Emperor has been gone for a long time, thousands of years. He's nothing but a desiccated husk now. But there are other gods, he would tell them. Gods who can give you real power. Cartamandua, in particular, would listen to this as the woman behind the throne, behind the legate. She had a great deal of respect and authority, but no real power of her own. Power that she secretly craved more than anything. Eventually, Volocatus would convince Cartamandua that in order to achieve the power she really desired, she had to remove her husband. She would be the natural successor, and that if he was to be given as a gift to the gods, they would reward her favourably. So between them they would lure her husband Venetus into a trap, where, while his wife looked on, smiled, his heart would be cut from his body while he was still alive, all in the name of the Chaos Gods. After her husband's death, using the connections that Volocatus had made amongst the social elite, he ensured that Cartamandua would become the new legate of this world, of Mortilous. She would become its singular leader. She would then appoint him as the planet's official high priest of the cult of the Emperor. From the many temples scattered around the world, he preached the teachings of the Emperor, the worship of the Emperor, but secretly recruited his chaos forces, and slowly began to build up a force of people willing to die for this new belief system, for these new gods. But he realized the biggest obstacle to this were the Astartes, as did Cartimandua, who by this point had taken Voloketas as her lover, as well as her confidant and a great advisor, to which many amongst the other members of the high society, particularly members of the Senate, were concerned about. But any who were concerned, dissenting voices, those voices were quickly silenced, converted, or simply made to disappear. While the Astartes were distracted by other things, knowing that there was such a prevalence of psychers on this world, Voloketas moved quietly, him and Cartimandua working behind the scenes to undermine the existing authority, to convert this world into a chaos world, a world of worship, of chaos undivided. In the past, visiting the fortress monastery in orbit, she'd gotten to know some of the members, some of the leaders of the Astartes, particularly one member, the chief librarian, Calatinium. This man, despite his transhuman status, had become somewhat smitten with the young, beautiful orator, Cartimandua. She was able to use this infatuation that he had against him, slowly twisting his mind and making him believe that they were abandoned by the Emperor long ago, that Mortilous was perhaps all that remained of the Imperium, and that perhaps certain other Primarchs of the past had had a point. During these lengthy discussions, even involving her High Priest, he slowly came around to the way of thinking, and before he had realized what he had done, he was by this point now twisted and involved in the worship of chaos. Using him, they were able to keep the Astartes distracted, knowing that they couldn't make a direct move to take control of the world fully while the Astartes sat in orbit. She managed to issue orders, now as the legate, that attacks on the dead alien Xenos worlds must intensify. And as a result, the Astartes were dispatched from the world to take care of these increasing threats that were being reported on highly questionable intelligence reports, but having no reason to doubt the planetary governor, the Astartes, many of them left the world on these foolish missions against imaginary enemies. But sticking to their oath, a single detachment of Astartes remained to guard Mortilous at all times, but it was believed that these small number of Astartes could easily be overcome. Quickly moving to take advantage of the departure of the Astartes once they were far enough away that their return would not be a quick one, Cartimandua and her lover Voloketas instructed their followers to begin rioting, causing distractions for the local planetary defense force, those that were not loyal, luring large numbers of them into predetermined locations, while Cartimandua issued override codes to the orbital defense weapons platforms that long had pointed at the ancient dead cities of Mortilous, and redirected them towards some of the vibrant living settlements of the world, now home to so many innocent people, but also to large numbers of loyal imperial soldiers. Using these ungodly powerful weapons, she unleashed hellfire from orbit, killing millions. In the chaos and anarchy that followed, they blamed the Astartes, they blamed the Imperium, and Voloketas began to openly preach his rhetoric that if the planet was to survive, if they were to grow, that chaos must be embraced. And as more people came around to the way of thinking, his followers grew, as did the worship of chaos and the strength of the demons to push through into this world. Realizing what was happening on the planet's surface, the small remaining company of Astartes began to deploy to the surface, realizing they needed to take control of the capital city and primary military buildings to take control of the planetary defense network, some of which were now opening fire on the fortress monastery. Having no warships left as they were all deployed, they had to try to deploy using drop pods or small light transports. Not all the Astartes would make it to the surface, but enough did. Loyal, or should I say, chaos troops were now deployed against the Astartes, realizing that there was a chaos cult infestation on this world. A purge would be needed. They called for their brothers to return, but knowing it would be a long time before they could get back to Mortilous. The civil war raged. The Astartes attempted to take control of the planetary defense system to prevent it being used to kill more people on the surface of the world, which currently Cartamandua was holding as her ace, to keep the Astartes at the edge of the city and prevent them penetrating, giving her forces more time to seize control of more of the valuable resources and other military installations of the world, and further dividing the Astartes forces. Without a clear command structure, without their overall head of the chapter present, the Astartes were thrown into chaos. Unbeknownst to them, one of their member was deliberately sowing the seeds of confusion amongst their number. Their chief librarian, Calatinium. But soon one amongst them, one of their lieutenants, known as Hadrianus, would realize what was happening, and he engaged the librarian in hand-to-hand combat, eventually besting the librarian and cutting off his head for his treachery and betrayal of his gene brothers. By this point, much to the horror of the Astartes, who, by now under the new command of Hadrianus, had managed to rally much of the planetary defense force still loyal to the Imperium to their banner, and had begun to purge several of the major settlements of the world to converge on Mona. But still there was the problem of the orbital defense system. Hoping that their brothers would get back in time to take care of the orbital weapons, they tried to hold out, but realized they would have to make their move soon, as they would simply be exterminated. They had also sensed a great disturbance in the warp, the psychers amongst them feeling the dark presence in the ancient cities was stirring. Whatever this dark presence was, it was not something that they could simply dismiss. Although they had little understanding of its true nature, it was not something that they would want getting out at this time. Finally accepting that he was going to have to incur severe civilian casualties, Hadrianus gave the order to begin rocket attacks on the city and to move the soldiers in, led by the Astartes, with Hadrianus at the front. The Astartes besieged Mona, leveling its buildings, breaking its defenses, realizing they had to get to Cartamandua, they had to get to her priest, her dark chaos priest, cut this snake's head off at the source, kill the body. That was the plan. But millions would die in the ensuing slaughter. Those who were still loyal, those who were not. There was no time to differentiate between the two, and a purge of the city was simply necessary at this point to save the rest of the world. Over 5 million people will be killed in the ensuing battle. It was believed probably half of them were loyal Imperial citizens, but their sacrifice was not in vain. Realizing that he was defeated, Volocatus and Cartamandua retreated from Mona, setting the orbital defense platforms to open fire on the surface once they had reached a safe distance. Them and a number of their followers escaped to a warp ship which they had hidden. Possibly the vessel that Volocaitus himself had arrived at the planet on, if indeed the rumours were true that he had come from outside of the system. That perhaps he had connections to the traitor Space Marine chapters, or other out-of-system chaos cults, but these were unsubstantiated theories, nothing concrete. Chasing them down, Hadrianus sent half of his men to secure the main military building, the headquarters of the planetary defense system. They were able to take control of the weapons platforms before they fired, but in doing this, he'd weakened his forces and was unable to prevent Cardamandua's escape. Her ship was able to reach orbit, and without any major warships or warp-capable vessels of their own currently in the system, she was able to escape into a warp rift. The fear was that the rift would not close due to the sheer number of chaos cultists on the surface and perhaps allow demons to invade the world. A fear that thankfully was not realized. But how close they had come to a full demonic incursion was realized when they began to study great temples that had been built in their name, underneath many of the temples dedicated to the Emperor. By the time the rest of the Astartes managed to return to the world, they found a world in chaos and fire and ruin. And still, with many cultists living there, there was a chance that the demons may still invade, may find willing hosts, and enough of a psychic presence on the world to open up a rift to allow their hordes through to consume the entire planet. The current chapter master ordered a complete purge of all cultists. The temples were to be razed. Anyone even suspected of being a member of the cult of Chaos Undivided would be unceremoniously and without trial killed. There was simply no time. The purge went on for days. But eventually, victory was declared. But at a great cost, not only in lives but also in the loss of Cardamandua, and it was believed as long as she was at large, she could always return. She was a dangerous and powerful figure, and there was a feeling that perhaps they'd never got all of the cultists out. There had been so many. Volocaitus and Cardamandua had had a lot of time to convert the people, and they'd hidden in plain sight, much to the horror of the Senate and of the Astartes. But Mortilous had survived. Wounded, beaten and burned, with over 1 billion people dead, but it had survived. For now, as the long-term ramifications of this conflict were not yet fully realized. The world had made a psychic impression. It had become noticed by others. Other eyes had turned attention to Mortilous. Its isolation, its large population, its great resources were now drawing the attention of other dark forces across the galaxy, forces they were going to have to now deal with in the ensuing years of this first conflict. That brings us to the end of part 2 of the story of Mortilous, my Warhammer fanfiction. As I've said before, this is still a work in progress and I'm still building up the lore and the story. Come back for part 3 as soon as I've finished writing it. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe and comment down below with any suggestions or any parts of the lore that I'm getting wrong. I'm sure there are some. With all that said, you've made it to the end of the video, thank you. And bye bye.